Well, thank you very much, Bruce. Ladies and gentlemen, look, I just want to give you a consumer warning here. It's going to be a long enough speech as it stands, but there's an even longer version of this speech, which I don't recommend any of you read, but in the unlikely event you want to follow it up, it's certainly there. I have a lot to say in life, and I got potted beautifully by Jerry Brownlee on this issue recently. So we're in a meeting, and the science paper comes up for discussion, and I'm running a line that there's not enough emphasis on the international linkages. And to buttress my argument, I refer to this really great New Zealander, who's also got a lot to say for himself, Sir Peter Gluckman, the chief scientist that John Keys just appointed. And so to sort of sustain my side of the argument, I say to the other ministers, I've had long discussions with Sir Peter on this issue. Jerry says, Tim, the word long in that sentence is redundant. If you and Sir Peter are having discussions, all of us would have understood they were long. So there is a longer version of the speech, but I'll just keep to the essence of the messages that I want to leave you, and it's about the role of agriculture and the issues around trade, climate change that affect this. I'm not going to talk about the ETS. That's domestic policy, and I don't do domestic policy, I do the international negotiations. I think this guy's coming to speak to you next week? Week after. Yeah. So he's the guy to talk about the domestic side of it. I'm just going to try and put the international side before you. Just thinking back, you will recall, if you're around my generation, or probably many of the people in this audience I refer to your parents, the pernicious nonsense about agriculture being a sunset industry for New Zealand. And you will recall that famously attributed to David Lonnie, the then Prime Minister. But I think you should also be aware that he was actually voicing sentiments that were quite widely held up and down the country at that time. It was no help to me, I can assure you, when I was New Zealand's chief agriculture negotiator. My personal view is that debate, the agriculture as a sunset industry, is, in terms of mainstream political thinking, and I mean broader than just the National Party, I include the Labour Party in this, is now politically dead. My personal view is that, and I strongly hold this view, is that agriculture will play as large a part in New Zealand's future as agriculture has played in our past. And I think that is probably close to the new orthodoxy. So the first thing I want to register with you is I think a lot of progress has been made in terms of a deeper understanding of agriculture's real role in this country. Now, it's not going to protect you from extreme political views, of course, but that is my view about where the centre of opinion in New Zealand now lies. To illustrate why I think that is the reality, why I do believe that agriculture will play as large a part in our future as it certainly and most obviously has in our past, I'm going to tell you a story around 4 big themes that are all interlinked. The first is the need internationally for a massive increase in global food production. The second is the strong likelihood of continued rapid economic growth in developing countries, particularly in Asia. The third is, for me, something very exciting, considering what I and other, including some people in this audience who might have worked with over the last 30 years, have been through vastly improved trading prospects for New Zealand agriculture internationally. And the fourth theme, the more difficult part of the equation, is the political challenge of climate change for agriculture. Now, this is basically a good news story on steroids. I think provided we have the wisdom to see where the political and economic markets are going. I don't think it's that hard to see where they're going, and my personal view is that we need to be in that space, frankly, before others fill it. So let's start off with the first theme, world food production and population. So the 2 key points here are this. There is a very strong consensus amongst demographers around the world that the world's population is likely to grow by about 3.5 billion people before stabilising approximately at 9.5 billion by 2050. Now this, alongside the massive expected increase in wealth of the developing world, computes to an increased need for food of 50% in the next 20 years. I mean, just imagine that. We have to increase world food by 50% in the next 20 years and 100% by 2050. I want to now talk about agriculture and water. I'm talking about the local controversy. I'm talking across the country and globally. Now, I realise that you farmers understand, particularly in this part of New Zealand, the crucial link, obviously, between agriculture and water. I wonder how many of you have looked at the latest Economist. There's an interesting article about California, with farmers in California holding up signs protesting, saying, "Water equals food. We grow food you eat," because of crisis facing Southern California in terms of water. Now on this planet, 97% of all water is salt water. Of the 3% that is not, 2/3 is locked up in ice and snow. Only 1% of the planet's water is liquid, fresh water. And of that figure, I've used this many times and I'm sure to use it again, 70% globally is used in agriculture. I mean, it's an astonishing figure. That means that only 30% of water is used for all other non-agricultural uses, households, industrial, whatever. So it's not surprising that the United States, which is the world's largest agricultural exporter, that in the US, 87% of all fresh water is used in US agriculture. Now you can drill a little deeper into this because it varies agricultural product by agricultural product, or sector by sector. The water intensity of livestock production is massive. I have estimates that says it takes, on average, globally, I don't know what the figure in New Zealand would be, but globally, about 800 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of beef. 1 litre of milk. 800 litres of water, 1 litre of milk. And 1,000 litres of water to produce 1 kilogram of beef. Now, I don't know what the conversion ratios for sheep meat would be, but I would imagine they would be of the same massive order of magnitude. Now, water is what we have in abundance. I, along with many other New Zealanders, suddenly focused on the fact that we only use 5% of the water that falls on our fair and pleasant land. And if we can increase that by another 5% over the next 20 years, we have the potential to double our agricultural exports. Of course, that's a huge domestic agenda behind that. I'm just looking at the bigger international picture. 20 years ago, I used to say, when I was New Zealand's chief agriculture negotiator, that New Zealand was a virtual grass exporter. I don't use that metaphor any longer. I use the metaphor today of New Zealand is a virtual water exporter. By the way, it also applies to products beyond agriculture. If you think about the aluminium plant down at T.Y. Point, in a sense that's a water export too. So we import the bauxite from Queensland. We've got this massive hydroelectric facility down there. This is essentially a way of exporting electricity, but actually you can view it as a way of exporting our water. So we have power in our water in a world that is short of water. We have to make sure for the generation that succeeds, well, me at least, that we use this wisely. Now the second factor behind this is world income growth. So at the aggregate level, forget this nonsense about the rich getting richer and the poorer countries getting poorer. This is completely wrong. What is actually happening is that the rich countries, meaning the developed world, are getting a